Don't just, the link that I sent no longer works. You have to go right to our main page and go under live. We haven't sent out that link at all. It's just our main page. That's what we sent out. Yeah. Can you hear audio? Okay. Yeah, just one more time. Stay on the line, Craig. He's going to talk. So weird. I'm getting full audio on my camera. I tested this. Yeah. Well, I don't know why this thing, yesterday it was working. It's the on camera mic. I just don't understand why the audio isn't coming through the HDMI. It worked yesterday, so. if this is what happens to me.
It worked fine yesterday and doesn't work today, right? Yeah.
To go straight into the mixer because you can do that right now. So you see the audio.
Right. Audio is great. Right. Oh yeah, there is audio. Yeah. But where is this audio coming from?
From the front podium, I've got it patched into the.
Okay. Right in the back there?
Yeah, that's what I don't understand why it's not working today.
Right.
So it's like a YouTube thing.
Like this is your receiver. And your transmitter's back there.
No charges.
Four, five. Microphone check. Everybody good?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us, and thank you for your continued patience. I really appreciate it. In a moment, I will be asking Superintendent Richard Day to provide a statement. Immediately following, I'll ask Corporal Matthew Powell to provide the first recommendation. Once he's done, we'll open up the floor for questions, starting from my left and working my way to the right. That is the usual one question and one follow-up. We are looking to try to keep this to like 10 minutes. I would ask that if we try just, with the concern for time, not to keep repeating, the same question. If it is answered, you can ask to follow up on that same question, but, just to kind of get a sense of what is the breadth of information that we will pass on to you. And finally, I ask them to just keep it friendly and respectful and allow everyone to ask a question. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Fraser. Everyone, I really appreciate you coming here today and taking the time to try to listen and understand this, what is an important issue and fairly complex and unique, because as you know, we do not normally speak to an investigation unless charges have been laid. The decision to do that in this rare case is because of the importance of this issue to all Albertans and the amount of coverage and questions that we do not want people to be left with a picture that is inaccurate. In July 2017, I will just say, my name is Superintendent Rick Janae, and I was a monitoring officer for this investigation. In July 2017, the Wild Rose Party and the Progressive Conservative Party merged to form the United Conservative Party. A UCP leadership contest followed, and on October 4th, 2017, Jeff Callaway dropped out of the race and publicly endorsed Jason Kenney. On October 28th, 2017, Mr. Kenney was officially elected as the new UCP leader. Allegations of wrongdoing surfaced after the leadership contest. In February 2019, a complaint was received by the Alberta RCMP in relation to these allegations, which resulted in the RCMP opening an investigation into the two separate allegations. Allegation number one was that Jeff Callaway entered the contest solely to attack another candidate, always with the intention of pulling out of the leadership race and endorsing a different candidate prior to the vote. Given the allegation that this candidate had portrayed himself as a legitimate candidate and as a result was able to solicit money from individuals who believed him to be a legitimate candidate, fraud, contrary to Section 380 of the Criminal Code of Canada, was identified as an appropriate offense to be investigated. Investigators reviewed the candidate's campaign debates and political advertisements, and also the campaign's financial records, which showed that approximately $95,000 was received by the campaign in financial contributions. As you likely know, Elections Alberta investigated Mr. Callaway's campaign finances under the Alberta Election Finances and Contribution Disclosures Act. The results of the Elections Alberta investigation are posted on their website. Alberta RCMP investigators conducted more than 170 interviews with contributors and campaign staff and examined over 25,000 related emails. Following this thorough investigation, we did not uncover evidence to establish that Callaway or any other person committed a criminal offense. The second allegation was that voter fraud occurred during the UCP leadership contest. In order to vote, a UCP member needed to register and receive a personal identification number, either by phone or email or text message. Once the PIN was received, that member could then cast a vote either by phone or by using another electronic device to access the voting platform on the internet. The allegations were that initially that emails were created in order to receive PINs and vote on people's behalf without their consent or knowledge. Identity fraud, contrary to Section 403 of the Criminal Code, was identified as the appropriate offense to be investigated under the circumstances. The online platform used by the UCP to hold the leadership contest was identified, and the RCMP obtained that database through a legal process. It contained data from more than 60,000 voters. The RCMP analyzed the data and identified several suspicious cross-sections of votes where multiple votes were cast using the same phone number or originating from the same IP or Internet Protocol address. Similar to an in-person ballot, the data did not show which candidate was voted for, but only that the vote had been cast using that unique identifier. We generated a list of these suspicious votes, conducted interviews with more than 1,200 individuals, and examined their UCP membership and registration forms. To be clear, the number of potential votes at issue, which after investigation were less than 200, would not have impacted the outcome of the leadership contest, given that Jason Kenney won with 61% of the vote. The RCMP did not find evidence that any leadership candidate encouraged their volunteers or staff to engage in identity fraud. The service provider for the online voting platform used by the UCP was not compromised and it worked as specified. This high-profile investigation was extremely complex and time-consuming due to several factors. The sheer volume of data to be analyzed and investigated took a significant amount of time. Furthermore, a portion of this data required that judicial authorizations be obtained both domestically and outside of Canada. The fact that the complaint was not received until 2019 impacted many witnesses' recollections of the event. The 2017 UCP Leadership Contest occurred at the same time as other internal party votes. As a result, some witnesses were unclear about which process the RCMP was investigating. Even for cases that appear to be fraud, voter fraud or identity fraud, there can be innocent explanations. For example, it was not illegal for one phone number or email to receive many PINs. It was also not illegal for many votes to be cast from the same IP address or phone number. For example, in certain families living under the same roof, this was common. We also saw the same pattern in office buildings and at voting kiosks where many people voted from the same IP. Following our comprehensive investigation into voter identity fraud, the Alberta RCMP determined that there were suspected instances of potential fraud. However, there was insufficient evidence to charge any suspect. And again, there was no evidence that any leadership candidate orchestrated these relatively rare instances. The decision on whether or not to lay a charge in Alberta rests with the police. However, throughout this investigation, as is normal for a significant investigation, the police did seek advice from the Crown, which began in Alberta, but was later referred to the Ontario Minister of the Attorney General, who assigned Crown prosecutors. All of these Crown prosecutors provided valuable and timely advice throughout the investigation, and their assistance was greatly appreciated. It should be noted that these allegations of possible voter fraud occurred during an internal political party voting process and in no way represent any possible fraud or shortcomings in our general provincial or federal elections. Nothing in the investigation suggested that the UCP failed to take reasonable steps to manage their internal process. We hope that the information shared today will further reduce the risk of similar incidents occurring in the future for any political party. The investigators received cooperation from the UCP and the leadership candidates, which assisted in moving the investigation forward. I would like to highlight that in investigating allegations of criminality, the thoroughness and completeness of the investigation is the standard that needs to be assessed. And the lack of criminal charges should not be the test of a successful investigation. In this case, experienced criminal investigators fully tested these allegations. In the end, Albertans can be confident that a thorough investigation, independent of government, was conducted. I would now like to ask Corporal Matthew Howell to provide the statement in French.
Bon matin tout le monde. Merci de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui pour discuter de cette enquête importante pour les Albertains. Cette occasion est unique puisque nous ne discutons pas habituellement des enquêtes où les charges ne sont pas portées. Je suis le caporal Matthew Howell et je traduis présentement les dires du surintendant Rick Jeannet qui était officier responsable du suivi de l'enquête. En juillet 2017, le Wild Rose Party et le Progressive Conservative Party se sont unis pour créer le United Conservative Party. Un concours à la chefferie a suivi. Le 4 octobre 2017, Jeff Calloway a abandonné la course et a publiquement endossé Jason Kenney. Le 28 octobre 2017, Kenney a officiellement été élu comme le nouveau chef du UCP. Les allégations de méfaits ont fait surface après le concours à la chefferie. En février 2019, une plainte a été reçue par la GRC de l'Alberta en relation avec ces allégations, ce qui a résulté en l'ouverture d'une enquête sur 2 allégations distinctes par la GRC. Une des allégations revendiquait que Jeff Calloway est entré dans le concours simplement pour attaquer un autre candidat, ayant toujours eu l'intention d'abandonner la course à la chefferie et endosser un autre candidat. Considérant l'allégation que ce candidat se dépeignait comme étant un candidat légitime et, résultant de cela, a eu l'occasion de solliciter des fonds d'individus qui croyaient qu'il était un candidat légitime, il a été déterminé que l'offense appropriée à enquêter était une fraude selon la section 380 du Code criminel. Les enquêteurs ont passé en revue les débats et des publicités politiques de la campagne de ce candidat. Une revue des dossiers financiers de la campagne a révélé que celle-ci a réussi à générer environ 95 000 en contributions financières. Elections Alberta a enquêté les finances de la campagne de Calloway sous l'Alberta Election Finances and Contributions Disclosure Act. Les résultats de l'enquête d'Elections Alberta ont été mis sur leur site Internet. Les enquêteurs de la GRC de l'Alberta ont effectué plus de 170 entrevues avec les contributeurs et le personnel de la campagne et ont examiné plus de 25 000 courriels reliés à celle-ci. L'enquête n'a pas découvert de preuves établissant que Calloway ou toute autre personne a commis un acte criminel. La seconde allégation relevait de fraude électorale pendant le concours à la chefferie du UCP. Pour avoir le droit de vote, un membre du UCP devait s'enregistrer et recevoir un numéro d'identification personnelle, NIP, soit par appel téléphonique, courriel ou message texte. Une fois le NIP reçu, le membre pouvait alors voter par téléphone ou en utilisant une plateforme de vote électronique exclusive sur Internet. Les allégations soulignent la création de courriels pour recevoir des NIP et voter au nom d'une autre personne sans leur connaissance ou consentement. Fraude à l'identité, section 403 du Code criminel, a été identifiée comme étant l'offense appropriée à enquêter. La plateforme en ligne utilisée par l'UCP pour tenir le concours à la chefferie a été identifiée par la GRC, qui a obtenu la base de données d'électeurs par le biais d'un processus légal qui contenait l'information de plus de 60 000 électeurs. La GRC a analysé les données et a identifié une section d'électeurs où plusieurs votes ont été soumis par le même numéro de téléphone ou provenant de la même adresse IP. Tout comme un vote en personne, des données ne montraient pas pour quel candidat la personne a voté, seulement qu'un vote a été soumis en utilisant un numéro d'identifiant unique. La GRC a généré une liste contenant ces votes suspects et a mené des entrevues avec plus de 1200 individus et a examiné leur adhésion et leur formulaire d'enregistrement au UCP. Il est important de noter que le nombre de votes potentiellement problématiques, qui, après enquête, était moins de 200, n'aurait eu aucun impact sur le concours à la chefferie, considérant que Jason Kenney a gagné avec 61% des votes. L'enquête de la GRC n'a pas trouvé de preuve qu'un candidat à la chefferie ou un autre membre de la campagne ait encouragé des personnes à s'engager dans la fraude à l'identité. Le fournisseur de la plateforme en ligne utilisée par UCP n'a pas été compromis et a fonctionné tel que spécifié. Cette enquête de grande envergure a été extrêmement complexe en raison de certains facteurs. Le grand volume de données analysées et enquêtées a pris un temps considérable. De plus, une portion de ces données nécessitait l'obtention d'autorisations judiciaires domestiques et internationales. Le fait que la plainte n'a pas été reçue avant 2019 a impacté la mémoire de l'événement chez plusieurs témoins. Le concours à la chefferie du UCP de 2017 a pris place en même temps que d'autres votes internes du parti. Résultant de cela, certains témoins n'étaient pas certains du processus particulier enquêté par la GRC. Même pour les cas qui semblent relever de la fraude électorale, il pourrait y avoir des explications innocentes. Par exemple, il n'était pas illégal qu'un numéro de téléphone ou courriel reçoive plusieurs NIP. Il n'était pas illégal d'utiliser la même adresse IP ou le même numéro de téléphone pour voter. Pour certaines familles habitant sous le même toit, cette pratique était courante. Nous avons aussi observé le même phénomène dans les immeubles de bureaux ou à des kiosques de vote où plusieurs personnes votaient à partir de la même adresse IP. Suite à notre enquête approfondie sur la fraude d'identité électorale, la GRC de l'Alberta a déterminé qu'il y a eu des cas suspectés de fraude à l'identité potentielle. Toutefois, il n'y a pas suffisamment de preuves pour inculper un suspect. De plus, il n'y avait aucune preuve qu'un candidat de la chefferie ait orchestré ces instances relativement rares. La décision de porter des accusations en Alberta reste avec la police. Toutefois, tout au long de l'enquête, la GRC a demandé conseil de la couronne, d'abord en Alberta, puis, après y être référé, au ministère du procureur général de l'Ontario, qui a assigné des procureurs de la Couronne. Ces procureurs de la Couronne ont fourni des conseils utiles et rapides tout au long de l'enquête et leur assistance a été grandement appréciée. Il est important de noter que ces allégations de possible fraude électorale se sont produites au cours d'un processus de vote interne du parti politique et ne représentent d'aucune manière une possible fraude ou lacune dans nos élections générales, provinciales ou fédérales. Aucun élément de l'enquête ne suggère que l'UCP n'a pas pris les mesures raisonnables pour gérer son processus interne. Nous espérons que les informations partagées aujourd'hui permettront à d'autres partis politiques de réduire davantage le risque d'incidents similaires à l'avenir. Les enquêteurs ont bénéficié de la coopération du UCP et des candidats à la chefferie, ce qui a permis de faire avancer l'enquête. Nous aimerons souligner que, dans le cadre d'une enquête d'allégation criminelle, la rigueur et l'exhaustivité de l'enquête sont des critères qui doivent être évalués et que l'absence de poursuite pénale ne doit pas être testament d'une enquête non réussite, a dit le surintendant Rick Jeannet. Dans ce cas, les enquêteurs criminels d'expérience ont vérifié ces allégations. Au final, les Albertains peuvent être sûrs qu'une enquête exhaustive, indépendante du gouvernement, a été menée.
We're going to do 10 minutes, like I said before, with questions and answers. Sir, take it away, please. And we'll start from the left.
Can you say how this affects Jeff Calloway's fines that are levied against him? Does this have any impact on this at all?
It doesn't. The elections Alberta investigation was independent of the RCMP's investigation. Where appropriate, we cooperated as the law allows, but we were not involved in that investigation.
And you mentioned this in the briefing, but just for the folks who are going to be watching this at home, the 200 votes that were suspicious to you folks, how concerning is that in the broad picture with another leadership race coming up this spring?
I'm not overly concerned, honestly. I think that the fact that we've been able to investigate it, we'll be able to talk to any party that asks us about these processes. You can never have a 0% risk, and this was not something that affected the outcome. And so, one of the things that I think this investigation revealed is that it would be challenging for any one individual to orchestrate a very broad fraud. At least how this the offense mechanisms here would have made that very difficult to affect the outcome.
Ce serait sur ces 200 votes potentiellement suspects. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a des d'accusations en lien avec ces 200 votes suspects qui peuvent paraître comme 200 votes?
If I understood your question correctly, and it'll be translated in response, the question was in relation to the 200 potentially suspicious votes, why were no charges laid? And because of the fact that no charges being laid, we're limited as how much we can discuss the actual facts in any one of those cases of fraud. But I can say generally, it is because there was insufficient evidence to support a criminal charge, in our opinion. So we weren't able to lay a charge.
And you mentioned it in the briefing. You go into without too much specific if there was one or potentially several suspects.
So the votes where, largely many of these the votes that we're talking about the 200, it's where we had clear evidence from the person whose identity was associated to that vote had no knowledge or did not permit anyone to vote on their behalf. So in those cases, obviously we tried to identify there was multiple different mechanisms. Sometimes it was an email address that the PIN was delivered. Sometimes it was through a phone system. And then also how the vote was cast. It could be cast through a telephone. It could also be cast by logging into a website. We do not have evidence to suggest that there is potential fraud in the case of those votes, but it's important to clarify that those matters have not been tested in court, and there was insufficient evidence to lay a charge, and our biggest obstacle was being able to satisfy ourselves that we would have sufficient evidence around the identity of the persons responsible to prove that. And when you think about how voting works, and you need a witness often to an offense. And if you don't have a witness, you need to tie the device that was connected to the offense if it's even knowable, because there's ways sometimes it's not knowable, but if it's knowable to that suspect in a clear manner, and we didn't have that evidence at the end of the day.
La réponse a été très longue, donc j'ai pas cette mémoire corporative assez grande. Toutefois, pour répondre à la première section de la question, au niveau de pourquoi il n'y a pas eu de charges qui ont été portées dans ce cas-ci, en fait, c'est une fois qu'on regarde la totalité de toutes les preuves qui viennent vers nous, on a réalisé qu'il n'y avait pas assez de preuves, dans le fond, pour aller vers des charges criminelles en cours. Il faut se rappeler qu'une fois que quelque chose est dans la cour, on doit essayer de prouver ça hors de tout doute raisonnable. Et si on ne pense pas que la preuve accumulée va mener, dans le fond, à cet aspect de tout doute raisonnable, on n'ira pas vers poser des charges à la cour pour pas poser des charges sans avoir une conviction de cela. Et plus encore, ce qui a été spécifié plus tard, c'est que on n'a pas été capable d'identifier avec certitude les personnes qui étaient, dans le fond, coupables, ou pas coupables, pardonnez-moi, suspectées d'avoir fait ces crimes-là.
You said that reporter thought there was some evidence, but not enough to lay charges. What more evidence would you have needed if you wanted to lay charges?
Yes, and just to clarify one thing that my colleague said, I do understand French, just not very great at speaking it. He's correct that that's the standard is beyond reasonable doubt once in court. The standard to lay a charge is reasonable grounds, and for police, practically speaking, we also need to know that it's viable. We definitely investigated this, and that's why it took the time that it took to the fullest extent that was reasonably possible, and we did not have sufficient evidence to in our opinion, lay a charge. Now, in terms of your question about, and I'll actually ask you to just repeat the part of that question because I wanted to clarify that as well.
So you said there was some evidence
Yeah.
What would you have needed to lay charges, assuming that there was?
So because we're not permitted to, based on privacy legislation, to get into the nuanced details of any aspect that where there was a suspected fraudulent vote. It's difficult to answer that question very fulsomely, but I will say that and nor would it be exactly the same in each case, because as I said, the mechanisms that we investigated weren't all identical. It appeared there was different mechanisms, although they all involved utilizing a pin to cast a vote. But I do believe that the most common challenge, as is always the case, well, it depends on the type of offense, but in this type of offense, the most challenging thing is to identify who is the person responsible for casting the vote, because that is the identity fraud, is the actual casting of that vote.
So you said that the investigation is concluded for now, or the prospects that it would reopen?
My crystal ball is always cloudy. Honestly, we fully investigated this. We did not end this investigation until we were satisfied that there was no other avenues that were viable to pursue. I think it's unlikely, but if new evidence arises, we will consider it. And if there's a viable investigation, we will pursue it.
Okay. I think you mentioned we're having this conversation because it is such a complicated issue. We have a lot of questions. I think a lot of people might find it unsatisfying to hear that we found potential suspicious activity did not result in charges. Well, in layman's terms, can you explain that to folks who are going to be confused about why it seems something's happening and charges?
Yeah. So what I would say is that in terms of individuals who've experienced this, we received really good cooperation from voters that we had approached, and we understand that creates concerns for them, and it probably in some ways may even create different and more important and equal concerns for other Albertans who don't understand the mechanism. So what I would say to you is that this wasn't a widespread situation. There was no hacking, like technological hacking. There was no use of foreign interference. This was a situation where it appears that it is possible that in some cases, somebody obtained personal information that allowed them to register and receive a PIN to vote, and then cast that vote. And those cases, if they could be proven in court, would still be a very small percentage of the overall vote. Hopefully that answers your question.
And then in regards to leadership candidates, that it was found nothing focusing on their behalf. Speak to beyond that campaign managers.
Yeah.
Like that was anything.
The reason we chose to be clear about that is that we could not provide an update without referencing two individuals because of just the nature of the way the allegations came in. And I would be unfair and improper to leave the public with a false impression that we found evidence, or we did not find evidence that they participated, counseled, or was in any way organized in voter identity fraud. Nor do we find anyone right in their inner circle was involved in that. In terms of possible suspects, again, given that these aren't crimes that are proven, I can't speak to what their relationship was. And I will comment that the votes, as I said, we can't even be sure who those suspicious cases even cast a ballot for, because it's not knowable.
I see there's some jockeying going on. I'll allow it. As long as we're easy to very easy questions, I appreciate that. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Sean Coffey. I'm wondering, just given the sensitivity and public attention of this case, what efforts were taken to ensure the separation and independence of officers as they needed this 5-year investigation to answer?
Yes, thank you for asking the question. The RCMP and any police service, is founded on a principle of separation from the police services function from the government that we serve and the people we serve. So those principles are always embedded in any investigation. We did not have any reason to believe there would be interference, and I'm very happy to say that there was no pressure from inside the organization or outside the organization, from any level of government. We were allowed to properly carry out this investigation based on the investigators' decision-making and the tasks that were identified. There was never, we need to wrap this up, we need to end this. We did it until we felt that we could not reasonably gather any further evidence that would be material to our inquiry.
Was there a lack of evidence that there was criminal wrongdoing on the issue of identity fraud? Or was the issue that there wasn't enough evidence to actually lead to an individual free?
So criminal wrongdoing has to be proven in court. We had, and of course the RCMP, we do, we investigate matters based on an allegation or discovery of information that suggests that an offense may have occurred. In terms of identity fraud, there was some evidence that, as has been reported in the media and as we were told by witnesses, that they did not vote or consent to have anyone else vote on their behalf. That, unless there's another explanation that we're unaware of, would certainly give reasonable grounds to believe that the offense may have been committed. The challenge is we do not have anyone charged, and so speaking about how we come to those beliefs would be inappropriate. And I also don't want to leave the public with a misimpression that this is a small subset of the total number of suspicious votes. There were innocent explanations for some, and the actual process, I think fortunately was not impacted by that, though if those offenses did actually occur.
To be clear, it was fraudulent registration in the names of real people, and it did not involve hacking.
Hacking, I use hacking in the terms of computer-assisted entry into the database, no hacking, and these are real people's identities that were utilized, that we investigated.
Another note, can you break down the Callaway investigation in terms of timeline?
Because there were some people that had potential evidence as a witness or as a person under investigation in both investigations, they did have to be run concurrently. As I mentioned earlier during the technical brief, certainly the Callaway investigation requiring 170 interviews to be thorough and complete would have taken less time had there been not intersections between investigative steps, not just interviews, but obtaining court documents, etc. So, but I don't have a specific comment because it was not over until we were done everything.
What did your investigation reveal about whether these 200 questionable ballots were the result of some sort of coordinated effort?
We didn't find evidence of a coordinated effort that's involving the entire leadership campaign. I'm not going to be able to comment on whether or not any of the individuals taking advantage may have known each other. I mean, Alberta politics is not that broad. It would be a statement that I couldn't be sure of, but we didn't find evidence of if the public, when the public thinks of a conspiracy, you would think of it as like organized, that would be a misunderstanding of the evidence that we found. That's all I can say in that regard.
Okay, what was the evidence you found as regards to some sort of coordination behind these 200 questionable ballots?
Again, we can't discuss what evidence we found of coordination, if any, because those matters are not resulting in charges. They don't involve any individuals that we've spoken about here today, and it would be improper for me to start to answer detailed questions that would really require me to, the answer would be different potentially for every single possible suspect. And there's not to suggest that there's a large group of suspects. 200 votes, we're just not saying it's 200, and not to say in every single case could we be sure, and that's one of the reasons we couldn't lay a charge, is we don't know who's responsible, but based on various factors, we do not believe that this was one person or persons acting in concert.
The public, and they're already saying this on social media, they're saying that the RCMP failed. To the people who were going to obviously say that we failed in this investigation for 6 years. I don't know.
Yeah. So, I certainly have no judgment of members of the public having opinions about our service. Our duty is to serve the public and gather evidence according to the law. The reason I said the statement that I was quoted as saying in the formal release as well is because if the standard that we are going to be evaluated, or that we evaluate ourselves by, is whether we lay our charge or not, there is risk of police having tunnel vision, focusing in, trying to charge people at all costs. Our job is equally to clear people as it is to charge. Of course, that process is our job is to remain open-minded on this throughout the whole process. What I can say is that the investigators, and I'm not directly an investigator, I was the monitoring officer. They are some of the most experienced investigators that I've ever worked with in my career. They always put this investigation at a high priority. I never had problems getting resources and time and funding to do this, because we all recognized that no matter how many votes were involved, this strikes at the principles of a fair democratic process. And that is not, that needs to be understood by the public. And we also want to make sure we don't end up, inappropriately casting blame on victims like we would in any offense. This was not something that we saw as a result of some clearly foreseeable issue. That's correct.
What if any briefings did you give to any political official during the course of the investigation?
I never briefed any political official.
So you never met anybody from the Solicitor General's Office of Justice?
No, we met with Crown prosecutors for legal advice. And unless we were meeting with somebody to take a statement from them as a witness or a suspect, that is the only time we meet with people. We did no contact that was about the investigation.
I'm not sure who's next. You want to present yourself? Any other questions? Go ahead.
Please. My colleagues down in Calgary and CBC, they did obtain a number of documents that show a really close connection between the Callaway and Kenny campaign, including a date for Mr. Callaway to drop out of the race. I know you don't want to get too much into the details, so you haven't laid charges, but what would be the standard for, what would have to take it to lay that charge? Yeah,
so the best thing I would advise anyone who's interested in that question is to look at the criminal code, look at section 380, and of course, you're not lawyers, I'm not a lawyer, so getting advice from someone who's an expert in that area can have an opinion. What I can say to you is that for us to lay a charge, we need to believe that there are reasonable grounds for all the elements of that offense. It is not, unlike a fraud involving selling a vehicle that you don't own or a house you don't own, you have to prove, which requires intent as well, knowledge and intent. We found no evidence in our conversations and interviews, and we had cooperation from the candidates that there was not a willingness to take on the leadership role if Mr. Callaway had won the election, leadership contest. And that is very, very relevant to whether or not this would have been a fraud under the criminal code.
Has there ever been a case like this, or was it charged?
Not to my knowledge.
forward to left, right, so.
I was just wondering, Superintendent, do you think that the criminal code has enough teeth to deal with a situation like this, where you see potential identity fraud? You know from one end that people have said, my name was used and I did not cast this vote. But you don't have enough evidence to lay criminal charges. I mean, is the criminal code going to charge you in a situation like this?
So I don't believe it is. I mean, because it's not just what the criminal code allows. We have numerous provisions under the criminal code that allow us to gather evidence lawfully. I fully respect the constitutional requirements around search, around interviewing processes, but I didn't feel that way.
And in terms of that, $500,000 went into this investigation just on overtime and travel expenses, not even including the regular salaries of 60 plus and 65 investigators. Do you think the taxpayers got their money's worth with this investigation? And should be satisfied that this investigation will deter this kind of potential suspicious identity fraud in the future? So
I think that the investigation was necessary. The amount of money that was necessary. I definitely do not have any concerns. I obviously can't speak for a taxpayer, but this clearly was an important investigation. We took it seriously from day one. There were even investigators that were promoted and could have left the unit, could have left the investigation. They all remained, all the key investigators remained engaged because we recognize the importance of having this done in as timely a manner as possible and as thoroughly as possible. Numbers like that can seem shocking when they're taken out of context. Involved in numerous criminal investigations, complex investigations. It costs money to investigate things thoroughly, and this is not an outlier. So based on that, now, of course, a taxpayer who doesn't have that context may have any opinion they want. And
Yes.
Can we do that at the end, maybe? Because I think, well, you're not going to remember it either. Yeah. Yeah.
No, if you have a question, please forget to us.
Oui, alors, la question française, c'est plutôt si c'est de juste repasser à travers l'importance de cette enquête et aussi son ampleur dans le contexte où on parle de potentiel électoral dans un procès à la chefferie.
So why don't we have Matt? I can understand everything he's saying. So if he says anything that needs to be corrected, I'll correct it in English. But
Donc, juste pour recadrer la question, pour être sûr que j'ai compris, en fond, c'est juste, vous voulez comprendre un peu l'ampleur de l'enquête et l'importance de celle-ci dans le processus démocratique, c'est ça? Donc, en fait, l'enquête, on s'entend que c'est une enquête d'envergure. Ça a pris 5 ans au total pour faire l'enquête et en venir à où est-ce qu'on en est aujourd'hui. Donc, quand on parle d'une enquête comme ça, on parle d'une enquête qui va affecter possiblement la confiance des Albertains en un processus démocratique. C'était important dès le début de vraiment prendre tous les aspects possibles de cette enquête, de prendre tous les avenues possibles pour enquêter et de mener vraiment cette enquête à bout. Donc, l'importance, en fait, peu importe peu importe l'enquête qu'on parle, que ce soit celle-ci ou une autre, c'est vraiment de prendre tous les éléments de preuve et de faire un canevas complet de ce qui s'est passé. Et là, c'est ce qu'on a fait dans cette enquête-ci. On a vraiment pris tous les éléments qui entourant l'enquête et on a vraiment réussi à faire l'image finale. Et c'est avec cela qu'on peut dire qu'on est confiant en nos résultats, on est confiant en ce que les enquêteurs ont réussi à ressortir de cette enquête-là. Et on espère que les Albertains auront aussi confiance en ce processus-là et en les efforts qui ont été mis dans cette enquête. Ça répond. Parfait.
Yep, that's correct.
So we're at the 15 minutes. That's a good time. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, I do.
Yes.
So you explained this in the text version, but if you could explain this again. So people told journalists that from the beginning there was a plan for Callaway to drop out, but you're saying you conducted your own investigation and you did not find evidence of fraud. So can you explain the difference between what was told to the journalists and what was told to your investigator?
I can't really, because first of all, I don't have what exactly was told to a journalist. What I can just say is restate what I said, which is we would need clear evidence or sufficient evidence to allow us to know that there was no intention for a person to take the role of the leader should they win should they win the contest, that it was that there was no hope, no possibility of that being something they would be willing to do.
And then again, to those people who, you said there is evidence that they have no idea why their name was used, but you can't like her. What would you say to them?
Just know that they did nothing wrong. Identity fraud occurs in our society, often, not often in this context, but in other contexts. Your private information relating, especially your date of birth, phone number, your full name, have value. Protect them as best you can, but a person who experiences identity fraud has not done anything wrong. They shouldn't feel guilt or shame.
What's the penalty range for identity fraud?
I don't know. I honestly, as a police officer, I investigate. I don't really worry about I try to focus on getting the facts and whether or not there's a reason for a charge. I do not turn my mind to the criminal sanctions for that. It probably is a range that's in the criminal code, but even that is often a very broad range. You'd have to look at actual sentences to give you an idea of what could have occurred. I will say on individual counts, you're not looking at lifetime in jail or anything like that.
Superintendent, sorry, just to go back. This is our last question.
Good.
Sorry, this is go ahead. Our last question. Sorry, just to go back to the numbers question. I mean, you didn't give us a clear breakdown of what the salaries were for every investigator involved, but I mean, looking at publicly available information, is it fair to say this investigation cost millions of dollars?
Well, honestly, I would want to do some math on that because, again, while the 5 core investigators spent significant amount of times over those 5 years, there were natural bottlenecks that occur in these types of investigations awaiting judicial authorization, especially multilateral legal assistance treaties. And during those times, those investigators were actively working and contributing to investigations in other areas. And so it's not as simple as taking 5, multiplying. And so that is the challenge with that. It would be a guess. A complete guess.
Everyone, thank you very much. Superintendent, thank you to all interviews. And everyone, thank you again for your patience.
Thank you.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny.